For 2 summers, I planted French marigolds in a ring around my tomatoes, exactly the way every companion planting guide tells you to. The marigolds came in thick and healthy, blooming right on schedule. Then I pulled up a stunted tomato plant and found its roots covered in hard little knots, the kind root knot nematodes leave behind, right next to a marigold root that looked perfectly clean. I had done everything right, and the nematodes never got the memo. Turns out marigolds do not repel them. They only work if you stop planting them the way everyone tells you to. 2 summers of that ring around the tomato bed, and I never once questioned it. Every gardening blog said the same thing. Tuck a few French marigolds in next to your tomato, and the pests, especially the little worms living in the soil, would leave your plants alone. So each spring I planted 3 of them along the edge of the bed, right where the guide pictures showed. By July, they were thick and yellow-orange, blooming like they had nothing better to do all season. The tomatoes did not share that confidence. Leaves turned pale in the middle of the afternoon, even on days I had watered that same morning. Growth slowed to almost nothing by the time the fruit should have been sizing up. I chalked it up to heat, then to nitrogen, then to half a dozen other guesses that all turned out wrong. By August, I was done guessing. I pulled a stunted plant straight up out of the bed to look at the roots. And that is when the whole promise fell apart in my hands. The roots were not thin and pale the way healthy tomato roots look. They were studded end to end with hard little knots, like the plant had swallowed a handful of gravel. Right next to it, close enough that the 2 root systems had been tangled together all season. The marigold roots looked fine. Clean. Not a knot in sight. I stood there in the dirt turning that root ball over. And the only question in my head was simple. I did exactly what I was told to do. So why had it not worked? That is root knot nematode. Down in warm, sandy soil across the south, it works its way into the roots and sets up a blockage that acts like a kink in a garden hose. Water and nutrients back up behind the damage, so a plant can look thirsty at 2 in the afternoon, no matter how much you gave it that morning. Close to 1 in 5 gardens tested in Louisiana turn up some level of this pest, though that number comes from one region and your own soil may tell a different story. 3 marigolds, planted exactly the way every list online told me to, blooming their heads off all summer, while the tomatoes 6 inches away were quietly losing the fight underground. I had followed the instructions to the letter. The nematodes had clearly not read them. If you are seeing yellow leaves and stunted growth in a bed where you already planted the companion flowers, do not assume nematodes just yet. Pale, wilting leaves can just as easily mean underwatering, low nitrogen, or a fungus working the roots from a different angle. The only way to know for sure is to pull one plant and look at what is actually happening at the roots. Turns out the problem was never how I cared for the marigolds, it was where I had put them. Here's the part nobody explains when they hand you that companion planting tip. Marigolds don't repel nematodes at all. They trap them. That is not a small difference. Repelling would mean the marigold gives off some kind of scent the nematodes want to avoid, staying clear of that whole side of the bed. Trapping means the exact opposite. The nematode has to go looking for the marigold, crawl straight into its roots, and get stuck there. Nothing about that process keeps a nematode away from anything. It draws the pest in on purpose. Think of a marigold root like a mousetrap dressed up as dinner. A hungry nematode picks up on it the way any promising root would smell to something searching for a meal, and burrows in expecting a host it can feed on and reproduce inside. Instead, it hits a dead end. The tissue inside a French marigold root reacts to that intrusion, and the whole operation shuts down before the nematode can complete its life cycle. It goes looking for a free meal and walks straight into a locked room. That reaction has a name. Marigold roots carry entirely called alpha-terthalda-terthionyl, and it puts the invading nematode under a kind of chemical stress that damages it before it can finish its life cycle. You do not need the full biology lecture here, but you do need what it means for your garden. A nematode that wanders into a marigold root does not walk back out to lay eggs somewhere else in your soil. It dies right there, inside the trap it wandered into. What that means in practice is simple. This compound does not drift out through the soil and start killing nematodes on its own, like some kind of natural pesticide. It only works inside the marigold root itself, on whatever nematode actually goes to the trouble of crawling in. Nothing about it protects the ground 3 inches away. That single detail is the whole reason the popular advice fails, and no backyard advice handing that trick out ever bothers to mention it. So why did med still fail? One mousetrap, sitting 3 feet from an open door. That mousetrap only works on the nematode that actually walks into it. Plant 3 or 4 marigolds along the edge of a full tomato bed, and the tomato roots sitting right next to them are still wide open the entire time, offering an easier meal a few inches away. A nematode moving through that soil does not have to choose the trap. It can choose the susceptible root 6 inches over instead, the same root that fed it all along with none of the risk. Only a small share of the population ever wanders far enough to find the marigold. The rest keep feeding on your tomatoes and keep multiplying right beside a flower that was supposedly there to stop them. I was reading an LSU Ag Center bulletin one evening, still annoyed about that tomato bed, and hit a line that stopped me cold. Planting marigolds as a companion next to a crop nematodes already like sounds like a reasonable idea on paper. It just does not hold up in the ground. The nematodes that wander into the marigold roots die there. The ones that wander into the tomato roots right next to it do not. And they go right on reproducing. I looked back at that ring of flowers and finally saw the mistake. The trap had been sitting beside the food, not replacing it. Every one of those marigolds had bloomed exactly the way it was supposed to. Sneezing at single tomato root, they were just sitting there, an option most of the nematode population walked right past, because the tomatoes were still the easier target the whole time. The advice was not lying about what marigolds can do, it was just never honest about what it takes to make them do it. Not every marigold pulls this off either, which matters more than most guides bother to mention. Tangerine, a French marigold variety, is one of the strong performers here. Planted the right way, it does not give a nematode any path to finish its life cycle inside those roots at all. Other marigold varieties, and other species entirely, do not carry the same punch. That is exactly why grabbing whatever six-pack happens to be sitting on the garden center shelf keeps failing gardeners who never did anything wrong except trust the label. One honest caveat before you go rip out a whole bed over this. Trap cropping only makes sense once you actually know root-knot nematode is living in your soil. It ties up a full bed for months at a time, growing nothing you can eat during that stretch. That is not a trade worth making just because one plant looked a little tired last August. Do not give up a whole bed unless those hard root galls are actually there. Which means the fix was never a new product. It's using the exact same cheap packet of seeds a completely different way. Once you know marigolds only work as a trap and not a fence, the fix is almost insultingly simple. Forget tucking 3 or 4 plants along the edge of a bed already full of tomatoes. That was always going to leave nematodes with an easy way around the trap. The actual fix is this. Once you pull your summer tomatoes or cucumbers at the end of the season, do not plant anything else in that same spot yet. Seed French marigold solid across the whole bed instead. Edge to edge. No gaps for weeds. No row left open for anything else to grow in. Every nematode left in that soil needs exactly one option, and one option only. the marigold roots. If this is the kind of detail you actually wanted about your garden, not just plant marigolds in hope, subscribe and hit the bell. Every video here goes this deep. Picture the bed once it fills in. No more empty rows of bare dirt between plants. No weeds pushing up through the gaps, just a solid mat of orange and yellow blooms from one edge of the bed to the other. That thick coverage is not there to look nice for the neighbors. It is there because every square inch of open soil is one more place a nematode can slip past the trap and keep feeding somewhere else. Leave that bed alone for 8 to 16 weeks, somewhere around 2 to 4 months, depending on how long your growing season allows. Let the marigolds grow in thick the entire time. Right up until the frost starts creeping close, then till or chop them straight into the soil, like any other cover crop. Only after that does a susceptible crop go back into that exact ground, the following spring or the next planting window. Think of it like a stadium with a single locked exit. Scatter a handful of ushers around one gate in a stadium full of 50,000 people, and most of the crowd finds a different way out without even trying hard. Put that same usher at every single exit instead, and nobody slips past. That is the entire difference between 3 marigolds tucked along the edge of a bed and marigolds covering the whole thing edge to edge. Density is not decoration here. Density is the entire mechanism. If you are about to buy another 6-pack of marigold starts to tuck in beside your tomatoes again this spring, stop. Save that money. Give the whole bed to marigolds instead, once the growing season for that spot has ended, and skip the tomatoes there entirely until the marigolds have done their work. For small backyard beds, tangerine, petite gold, and single gold are the varieties worth planting for this job. All 3 are French marigolds, and all 3 have shown they do not give a nematode any way to finish its life cycle inside those roots. Grab whichever one your local garden center actually stocks. The point is the density and the timeline, not chasing down one specific packet with a specific name on it. Here's the trade nobody warns you about before you commit a whole bed to this. This effect does not last forever. Give it about 1 growing season after you till the marigolds in, and the nematode population starts climbing back toward damaging levels on its own. This is not a plant it once and forget it fix. It resets the board. It does not clear it permanently, and pretending otherwise sets you up for the exact same disappointment down the road. And here is the trade-off nobody mentions when they hand out this tip. That bed sits out of commission for 2 to 4 months while the marigolds work. You will not be growing tomatoes on that exact ground during that stretch, and no amount of wishful thinking changes that math. If you only have 1 bed to your name, that means rotating through it in sections, or accepting a season without tomatoes right there while the marigolds finish the job underground. But even the gardeners who get every one of these steps right still manage to lose this fight over one small thing. Even gardeners who do this exactly right still trip over one thing: the name on the seed packet. Not every marigold does the same job, and the names are close enough on the rack to trick anybody. Tangerine, the French marigold that actually does the work here, does not give a root knot nematode any way to finish its life cycle. Tangerine gem, a different variety with an almost identical name, sits on the susceptible side of the list instead. Grab the wrong one, plant it thick, wait your full 2 to 4 months, and you still end up right back where you started, wondering why the trick everyone swears by never worked for you. African marigold is a slightly different story. Crackerjack, an African marigold, can suppress some root knot nematodes, but it can also host other nematodes, which makes it a poor blanket recommendation for a backyard bed. For most backyard beds, the French marigold varieties are still the simpler bet, because they have the broadest track record against root knot nematodes. The exact cultivar still matters. A gardener who reached out to me a while back had done everything right, or so she thought. 3 summers of French marigolds around her squash bed, and the plants kept struggling anyway. Every book she owned, every gardening forum she read, told her the same thing she was already doing. Turned out the seed packet she had grabbed off the shelf was not the variety with any track record behind it at all, just a pretty marigold with a name close enough to fool her, sitting on a rack of a dozen lookalikes with no way to tell them apart by the picture alone. Not every marigold on that rack has earned its reputation. No matter how similar the label looks or how confident the display sign sounds, stick to French marigolds with an actual track record. Tangerine, single gold, petite gold. Skip the decorative ones that just happen to share the same last name and none of the results. That is the real reason marigolds still won't stop nematodes for some gardeners, even the ones doing every other step right. That is how a correct method fails at the seed rack. Before you give a bed months of your season, read the cultivar name twice. So if your marigolds never seem to be doing their job, check the tag before you blame the flower. Marigolds were never lying to you. They just needed the whole bed, not a spot next to the tomatoes, and a few months you probably didn't think they needed. The trick everyone repeats isn't wrong. It's just missing the fine print. Before you commit an entire bed to marigolds for the next 2 to 4 months, do one quick check first. Pull up one struggling plant, rinse the roots, and look for those hard little knots. No knots, no nematode problem. And no reason to give up a whole bed's worth of growing season. And if the knots are there, here's what to do. This weekend, once you've cleared out the last of the summer tomatoes, don't plant anything else on that bed yet. Seed French marigolds solid, edge to edge. Give them at least 8 frost-free weeks. If your first frost is closer than that, save the bed for a full run next summer. The flower was never the problem. The way we've all been told to use it was.